Let's start by reviewing the problems that we did yesterday when we solved by completing the square method. Remember, anytime when we see a completing the square method, we know we have to use this because if I were to put this in the bottoms up, my two values that multiply to give me the top would not equal the same thing that needs to be on the bottom. So that's how I know to use completing the square. There was a couple of ways that you could do this. I'm going to go with the method of starting by grouping the two values that are alike, meaning they both have an x. And then I'm going to get rid of the other value. So it's plus 15, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 15 from each side. I'll be left with x squared minus 8x. Remember, to complete the square, I'm going to put something in. And if I put something in, I have to keep the problem nice and balanced. I'm also going to take it out. Then I've got 4 minus 15 behind the equals, which gives me negative 11. The next step on what we want to do is identify our b value. So our b value is negative 8. Then remember, we take half of that negative 8. So negative 8 divided by 2 gives me negative 4. Well, then I want to square negative 4. So negative 4 squared is going to be 16. I like to put onto the line here negative 4 squared. And when I take it out, I'm going to take out what negative 4 squared is, which is 16. Remember, we have to condense at this step. So when I get ready to condense, it's going to turn into x minus 4 squared minus 16 is going to equal negative 11. When I get to this point, it is just like what we did a couple of days ago, where we just solved using the square root method. I'm going to add 16 to each side. Where I'll be left with x minus 4 squared equals positive 5. Then I need to get rid of the squared, and I do that by taking the square root. But please remember, anytime I take the square root, I am going to have two answers. So square root of 5 cannot be simplified here. So I'm going to leave it plus or minus the square root of 5. Then I have x minus 4 is equal to that. We learned by our shortcut or our cheat that anytime I have a radical left here, I can just simplify by saying, okay, I'm going to add 4 to each side. Well, I can't combine those two things because the square root of 5 and 4 are not like numbers. One has a radical, one does not. So my final answer for this one will be x equals plus or minus the square root of 5 plus 4. Now that you've seen this one, pause the video, make sure that you know what you're doing, work through the second one, and then check your work. Okay, we're still going to group together the things that are alike, and that means I'm going to get rid of the things that is not alike. So it has minus 12. To get rid of it, I'm going to add 12 to each side. Now the reason that number 2 is different than number 1, notice that my a value is no longer 1, it's a 2. So when I get ready to do this, I need to factor out the 2. So 2 divided by 2 gives me 1x squared. 4 divided by 2 gives me 2x. I'm going to put something in, and if I put it in, I have to keep things nice and balanced and take it out. And then I have negative 6 plus 12, which equals 6. We want to identify our b value, which in this case is 2. We take half of that, so 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then we square that answer. So 1 squared equals 1. I like to put 1 squared into the problem, and when I take it out, 1 squared is 1. But I can't forget that I've already factored out a 2. So what I need to do is not only take this 1 and take it out, but I have to take 1 times 2 out because 2 has been factored. At this point, we can condense. So I'd have 2 times x plus 1 squared. That's going to be minus 2 because 2 times 1 is 2 equals 6. Now we're back into solving just like a normal equation. We add 2 to each side. So we have 2 times x plus 1 squared is going to equal 8. Then I got to get the x plus 1 squared by itself, so I divide everything by 2, where I'm left with x plus 1 squared equals 4. Well, remember, to get rid of the squared, we undo it by taking the square root. And anytime I take a square root, I'm going to have a positive and a negative answer. So I have to have 2. So I'll have x plus 1 is equal to positive and negative 4. Please be careful not to put our final answer as x equals positive negative 5, because remember, x plus 1 equals 4 is going to solve to be x equals 3, and x plus 1 equals negative 4 will actually solve to equal negative 5. So my two solutions for that problem are x equals 3 and x equals negative 5. For number 3, same process. Group together the things that are alike, so the x squared and the 10x, and we're going to get rid of the thing that is not alike, which in this case is negative 88. We'll subtract 88. So I'll be left with x squared minus 10x plus something, and then I have to take something out, and that's going to equal negative 94. Identify your b value, which in this case will be negative 10. Half of negative 10 is negative 5. And then negative 5 squared equals 25. So what I'm going to put in is negative 5 squared. What I'm going to take out is 25. Then we're ready to just condense and solve. So x minus 5 squared minus 25 is going to equal negative 94. Need to add 25 to each side. When I do that, I'm left with x minus 5 squared, and that is going to equal negative 69. To get rid of the squared, we take the square root, and I see an issue right here. I know as soon as I take the square root of a negative number, if I were to put this into the calculator, it would tell me that there is no solution or a domain error. Remember, two types of errors in the calculator. The first one is a syntax error, and if you get a syntax error, that means you've typed something in wrong. The second type is a domain error. For domain errors, that means that cannot happen and there is no solution. So here's a review of what we've done the last few days. Now we're going to transition into the last way that we need to solve, or the last possible way we can solve quadratic equations. The most important thing about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula is that you know how to use this quadratic formula right here. You do not have to memorize this. It is provided for you on the EOC. However, you do have to know how to plug values in and use your calculator to do this. So, we want to make sure, first and foremost, this is very important what I see here, that the equation is equal to 0. So if I scroll back up to the top, I notice that none of these equaled 0. I would not be able to use the quadratic formula until I made those equal 0. So instead of moving 15 over, for number 1, I'd move 4. Instead of moving 12, for number 2, I'd move negative 6, and so forth. So these are the important steps that I am able to, number 1, identify my A, B, and C values. So identify what A equals, what B equals, what C equals, making sure that the problem is equal to 0. Then all you have to do is plug it into the quadratic formula. First thing I want us to do on these problems is just to rewrite the problem in standard form, meaning get everything on the same side and make it equal to 0. In number 1, I can see that these things are not equal to 0. This is equal to 3x, which means I need to move 3x. Notice where I'm putting the 3x when I subtract, because this side will now cancel, and I want it to stay in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So I want the 3x to be in the middle as my b value, so I'm not confused. If we move on to number 2, this is not equal to 0, so I need to subtract 6 in order to make this thing equal 0. So I'd have x squared plus 8x minus 2 equals 0. For number 3, I notice that I have a number on the outside of the parentheses. Well, in order to do this one, I'm going to want to distribute that 3 into the problem. I do see that it equals 0, but I need to distribute. So I will have 3x squared minus 6x plus 21, and that's going to equal 0. Finally, for number 4, I'm trying to make this thing equal 0, which means I'm going to subtract 21 from each side. Notice that I am combining it with the other constant of 5. So I'll have x squared minus 16 equals 0. Now, as we talked about just a second ago, it is very important for us to be able to identify my a, b, and c values each time. So if I go back for number 1, what is my a value? It is 2. What's my b value? That is negative 3. And what's my c value? That's 5. These are very important steps. It might not seem like it, but this is what we have to be able to know in order to run the quadratic formula. For number 2, what's my a value? That'd be 1. My b value is 8. And my c value is negative 2. Same process for 3 and 4. So for number 3, what's my a value? 3. My b value is negative 6. And my c value is 21. For number 4, my a value is 1. Notice that there's not a b here. There's not just an x in the problem. Therefore, my b value is 0. And my c will be negative 16. So these are the first steps. If you can do these pieces, then plugging into that quadratic formula is going to be very, very simple for us. So let's go ahead and look at the next page of our notes. Again, you can go through all these different steps, make sure the equation is equal to 0, identify a, b, and c, and then plug a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. And then it becomes simplifying radicals, which we've done before. Main thing to remember is what the quadratic formula is. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And it's very important that we remember this negative b at the beginning of the problem, and inside the radical it is b squared. So let's go through the process together. For number 5, x squared minus 15 equals 2x. Does this problem equal 0? No, it doesn't. It equals 2x. So the first thing we have to do is make the problem equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 2x from each side. Notice I'm putting the 2x where the b value would go. So x squared minus 2x minus 15 is going to equal 0. Next step is for us to identify my a, my b, and my c values. So the a value is 1, the b value negative 2, and the c value is negative 15. Now I suggest when we get ready to plug these things into this formula that you use a lot of parentheses here. And just go through the formula anywhere that you see a variable. For right now, we want to use an open parenthesis. So negative b, I'm going to use parentheses, plus or minus the square root. Instead of b squared, I'm just going to put an open parenthesis, squared, minus 4 times whatever a is times whatever c is, divided by 2 times a. Now the reason I like to use these open parentheses is because I see that that first term is a negative b. Well, if I look, my b value is negative, and I don't want to think, oh, it's already negative, I don't have to do it. We are definitely changing the sign of whatever b is every single time. Also, that helps when I come here to b squared. that I have -2 squared, which would give me +4, instead of just typing into the calculator a -2 squared, which would tell me -4. Keep going through the problem. -4 times A, in this case A was 1, times C, which in this case was -15. And we're dividing by 2 times A. Now, if you have the black calculator, you want to press the button that has a box over box. That'll start the division line for me. If you're using Desmos, you just go ahead and hit the slash button near the question mark, and that'll start my division bar. And if you have one of the older calculators, you're going to need to use a lot of parentheses here. So if I'm using the black calculator, I hit the box over box button. I want to start with a negative sign. So negative, open parenthesis, type in -2, close parentheses. You cannot put a plus and a minus into the calculator at the same time. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to pick one and then go back and retype it in. I like to typically start with the plus. So I would have at this point plus and then square root, which would be second x squared, would start my radical. Parentheses, -2, parentheses squared, -4, open parentheses, 1, close parentheses, open parentheses, -15, close parentheses. At this point, you want to hit the over arrow, whether you're in your black calculator or where you're in Desmos. You want to hit the over arrow so that the radical will stop drawing the line all the way across. Then you want to hit the down arrow to go to the denominator, where you would type in 2 times 1. Once you've typed in your 2 times 1, you hit enter, and your calculator will send out an answer for us. Now, let's go through the steps of what the calculator is doing. You do not have to show this every single time, but I want you to understand what your calculator is doing as you do this. So, negative times -2 gives me a +2, plus or minus the square root. -2 squared is 4. 4 minus 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times -15 is -60. Then I'm going to divide that by 2. Well, we know that anytime we have minus a negative, that is really like a keep, change problem. And then I could simplify there. Again, I do not need to see this every time as you're working it through. I just want you to understand what your calculator is doing. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 divided by 2. Well, we all know that the square root of 64 is going to be 8. So we have 2 plus or minus 8 divided by 2. Therefore, my two answers would come from 2 plus 8 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So if I type in the plus sign on the calculator first, that's what I would get. Then to change the minus sign, if you want to do this on the calculator, you simply hit the up arrow and hit enter. That'll retype the entire problem. Then you just use the back arrow to change this plus sign to a minus sign. So 2 minus 8 gives me -6. -6 divided by 2 tells me -3. Again, everything that I just showed you right in this box, you do not have to write on your paper every single time. I just want you to understand what your calculator is doing as you work through it. So let's look at number 6. For number 6, we know that the problem has to equal 0. I can see that it's not equal to 0, so I need to start by subtracting 9. When I do that, I get 3x squared plus 5x plus 1 is going to equal 0. I could try and put this in bottoms up, but I know that 3 times 1 is 3, and there are no two factors of 3 that are going to add up to be 5. So I can go through and use my quadratic formula. My a value is 3. My b value is 5. And my c value is +1. Come back to my formula, which which is here. We want to make sure we always use this. Again, if you can't memorize this, or you don't want to memorize this, it is on the formula sheet. So you just click on formula sheet, go to quadratics, find the quadratic formula. Now again, I like to plug in the pieces, so negative b, and then use parentheses there, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. Then all you have to do is come by and plug in the values. My b value is 5. In this case, it's positive 5. So I have 5 squared minus 4 times a of 3 and c of 1. Remember, 2 times a goes in the denominator. And again, you can put all this into your calculator at the same time. Remember, you would start by hitting the box over box button or the slash if you're using Desmos. And just make sure that you're typing in your problem the exact way that you see it on the screen. So negative times 5 gives me negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 5 squared is 25 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 1 is still 12. Now it's going to be divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 3 is 6. So we're going to simplify. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 25 minus 12 is 13 divided by 6. Now, this one's going to look a little bit different than what we just had in number 5, because in number 5, under the radical, we had 64, which was a perfect square, so we could simplify. In this case, under the radical, we have a 13. And so we need to see if we can simplify 13. We know that's not a perfect square. 13 is a prime number, so it can't be simplified. So again, because I have the radical, I cannot actually add these up. So for my final answer on this one, it would look like this. Your calculator might give you negative 5 plus the square root of 13 divided by 6, and negative 5 minus the square root of 13 divided by 6. And that's fine. Just know that you have to have 2 answers, and so here are your 2 answers. Now, if you're not understanding or you're lost, make sure you're pausing this video and rewinding and going back to make sure you understand where everything is coming from. If you would like to try these on your own, click pause and then come back and watch the video when you finish. For number 7, what we need to determine first, does this problem equal 0? Well, yes it does. It's very clear. So then I can just go through and identify my a values, which is 4, my b value, 9, and my c value, 9. Now, all I have to do is plug it into my quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Well, at this point, we just go back and plug in our values. So b is 9, b is 9, a is 4, c is 9, and a is 4. And again, you would just type these things into your calculator. You need to know how to use the radical sign. That's second x squared, which you would get negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 minus 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 9 is 144. And then we just want to divide it by 2 times 4, which is 8. So as we continue to simplify, negative 9 plus or minus the square root. This is going to be a negative 63 over 8. Well, we should see right here, anytime I take the square root of a negative number, it's going to give me a certain answer, and we cannot do that, so this one will be no solution. As you type it in, you're going to get domain error when you do the plus side and when you do the minus side. Okay, for number 8, definitely not equal to 0. So what I need to do is get everything on the same side. It doesn't really matter which way you choose to move things. I just like to keep as much positive as possible. So I'm going to subtract x squared, move the x, so I'm going to add x. Notice I'm keeping these in line with what they're going to combine with, and then I'm going to subtract 1. So I'll have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Well, in this case, I still want to go through and identify my a, b's, and c's. So a equals 1, b equals 6, c equals 9. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. Then we just want to plug in these values. B is 6, a is 1, c is 9. So I'll be left with negative 6 plus or minus the square root 36 minus 36, because 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 9 is 36, divided by 2. Well, if you notice, inside my radical here, I'm going to get negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 divided by 2. Well, square root of 0 is just going to be 0, so really it's negative 6 plus or minus 0 divided by 2. So my two answers here are going to actually be the same thing. When I do negative 6 plus 0 divided by 2, that's negative 6 divided by 2, which is negative 3. There's one answer. And when I do negative 6 minus 0 divided by 2, that's still going to be negative 6, and negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So even though I have two answers here, it is okay that they're the same. This just means that my x-intercepts are sitting on the x-axis, and it's in one spot, meaning that's my vertex. And that is how we use the quadratic formula. Again, if you get stuck, please make sure that you pause the video or go back and read anything that you might need to see.